Good morning. I'd like to call the HUD's Housing, Urban Development and Zoning Committee meeting to order. It's October 13th, 2022. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone,
Present.
Alderman Kotar.
Here.
Alderman Boyd, Alderman Ryan,
Here.
Alderwoman Evans, Chair Davis.
Present.
I have 4 present, 2 absent.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We do have, I see we have minutes. Chair will accept a motion to approve our minutes from October, is it 6th?
Yes.
Yeah.
So moved. Alderman Cone. Second.
It's been moved in second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderman Kotar,
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd, Alderman Ryan,
Aye.
Alderwoman Evans, Chair Davis.
Aye.
We have 4 aye votes.
Thank you for approving the minutes. We have one item on our agenda for today, but it will be a lengthy one. So we have Board Bill 101 before us, and we have the Director of the Community Development Agency is going to review that board bill with us. And what I'd like to do is to ask Noel, I'm sorry. Mr. Pfeffer, could you please go ahead and start with Board Bill 101? Thank you.
I'd be delighted, Chairwoman, and it's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I hope it's not incredibly lengthy. I'll try and be brief, but we are here to discuss the 2023 Annual Action Plan Bill. We do this bill every year. It's a required step in our HUD-approved process to submit for and ultimately receive over $25 million in federal grant funds. And I'll go over the bill and then happy to answer any questions this committee may have. But to start with, I'll start with the whereas clauses. And there's a couple of important paragraphs I want to flag on page 2 that just share a little bit about how we got to this point and where our current process comes from. And we do this bill, and these paragraphs are in every bill that we've done since 2014. Because as the whereas clauses provide, in 2012, the St. Louis HUD field office initiated a technical assistance request for the city to enhance the city's ability to address capacity gaps identified during an on-site assessment spurred by HUD's technical assistance office. And subsequent HUD technical assistance team reviews and site visits resulted in a requirement from HUD that the city's process for evaluating proposals to be funded with CDBG and home funds and awarding these funds to subrecipients and others be redesigned. And specifically, they had to be redesigned to be fully compliant with 2 CFR 200, which requires open and competitive procurement for all federal funds in order to meet the audit requirements. And so we did redesign them. And our former CDA director, now at the Housing Authority, Alana Green, led much of that effort. And in partnership with HUD, designed a process designed to be purely merit-based and to keep politics and other political considerations out of it. And specifically the way it works, and I'll share a little bit more about how we did the process this year in a moment, but specifically the way it works is that we conduct an RFP and we solicit applications and then we staff reviews. We have a great team here at CDA of community development specialists and monitors and accountants and housing analysts. We review these and then the staff rates them. I don't rate them, the staff rates them. Puts together, then we average those ratings. And then on the basis of those ratings, we make our award decisions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk through the exhibit. But another piece of this process was a citizen participation plan that was put together, and which requires a series of public hearings. This is one of them, as well as that we announce our funding priorities well in advance and give the public an opportunity to comment. And so we go through this process every year. And this year we started in July. We held a public hearing. We conducted training for folks interested in applying, a workshop. Then we issued the RFP. We held additional capacity building trainings for financial management, for best practices to assess eligibility, all in July. Then the CDBG RFP closed on August 26, 2022. And then we went through the process I just described of staff rating these proposals and then ultimately putting together our annual action plan. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about specifically what we saw in the applications and some unique characteristics of this round in a moment. But that's a little bit of the history of where this process comes from and the process that we went through to arrive at this bill. Now just going to very briefly walk through the sections. And essentially, the first one is just authorizing the mayor to submit this annual action plan. It has to be submitted by November 15th. So this is a time-sensitive bill. We need to move it out in the regular order in order to have the bill go into effect in time for the mayor to file and submit this annual action plan 45 days before the start of our program year, which is January 1st, and 45 days before is November 15th, to be in compliance with 24 CFR 91.15. So that's section 1. Section 2 appropriates CDBG funds. Section 3 appropriates home funds. Section 4 appropriates ESG funds, and Section 5 appropriates HOPWA funds. A little bit on the eligible uses of each one. CDBG and home funds both need to be used to meet HUD national objectives in terms of supporting low to moderate income individuals is one, eliminating slum and blight is another, and meeting urgent needs is a third one. And in this case, there's then a bunch of subcategories under that. So for example, we can spend up to 19% of our allocation on public services, which is essentially the more programmatic type of programs for elderly, childcare, food assistance, what have you, job training, et cetera, homeless services. We'll talk through it in the exhibit. But these are the eligible uses of these CDBG and home funds. The home funds, however, are solely used for housing production. And that's the way we've done it for the past many, many years, because we found that given the smaller allocation, that's the most effective way to administer these for maximum impact. Moving on to the ESG funds, these are emergency solutions grant funds. And the purpose of these funds, there's 5 eligible programs. One is street outreach. It's fundamentally to serve the needs of our unhoused community. But the eligible uses include street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, and HAMIS. A couple things I'll flag is that historically these funds have been used to fund our Biddle shelter. However, we also allocate some of these funds to Gateway 180 and Peter and Paul. And these funds are really administered not by CDA, but by the Department of Human Services. But another important flag I'll offer is that only up to 60% of these funds may be used for street outreach and emergency shelter. And that's an important constraint handed down to us by the federal government. And then finally, we have HOPWA. HOPWA is Housing Opportunities for People Living with AIDS. It can be used for tenant-based rental assistance. It's administered by the Department of Health. It can be used for short-term rent, mortgage, and utilities assistance, for permanent housing placement services, for supportive services, for facility-based housing. And historically, the city's long-term sub-recipients under the HOPWA program have been Doorways, which provides a variety of supportive services and housing itself, as well as Peter and Paul Community Services. So that's an overview of the funds overall and their history. Finally, turning now to the exhibit. I won't go through every line item in detail, but what I will do is I'll flag changes and tell you a little bit about context of this funding cycle. And the most important, there's two important pieces of context actually. One is that we had our CDBG award cut very slightly. It wasn't substantial, just a couple percentage points, but cut slightly by HUD. And this is essentially a warning shot that we're not spending this money fast enough. And if we don't spend it down faster, further cuts will be coming down the line. So it's important to understand and really important that we deploy these funds at velocity. The second really important item of context is that for the first time that I've heard of, and I've asked a few folks about this and no one seems to recall this happening before, for the first time we had fewer applications from our nonprofit community than we had funds available. And I think this speaks to a few different things. First off, it does speak to the fact that there's a lot of money floating around right now, and there's a lot of opportunities. And our ecosystem is currently stretching to try and absorb these funds, and it's a question of capacity. So that's one piece. But the other piece of it is that, frankly, CDBG funds are notoriously administratively burdensome, and really only pretty sophisticated parties have historically been able to work with them pretty effectively. That's something that I hope we can change. I hope that we can review our processes, review our procurement processes, the documents we require for contract execution, the way we do monitoring, perhaps looking at for folks who have performed well, taking it from a monthly to a quarterly system, a variety of things we're looking at just to try and make these funds a little bit less administratively burdensome. But it's certainly a flag, and we'll also be doing outreach with all of our subrecipients and the community at large to hear what we can do to make these funds more accessible. I will share, however, that the difference, the excess that we didn't get applications in, we just put into housing production because we know there's an enormous need there for the city, and that we can deploy those funds effectively. But the other thing I'll share is that we're in the worst of both worlds because we got fewer applications as a whole, but we also got more applications for public services than our public service cap would allow. We got almost $1 million more in applications for public services than the 19% public service cap. And that meant that we did have to reject applications. And so essentially the system that we put together was the following. We said for applicants that scored higher than 90 points and have drawn down their previous awards and have demonstrated that they can spend this money, they were awarded the full award that they applied for. So they were fully awarded. For applicants that scored between a 75 and I'll say there was one applicant that scored 90.01 and that hadn't drawn down their last year's funds, so they were funded at their previous level. They were still funded, they just weren't increased. Then between 75 and 90, we made the determination that anyone who had previously received funding would retain that level of funding, but would not see an increase because we couldn't afford it given the fact that we had 1 million more in applications than funds. We also determined that for new applicants, and there were two in this case, well, there were two new applicants that scored between a 75 and 90. There were no new applicants that scored above a 90. But for new applicants that scored between 75 and 90, and for transparency, those were the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency and SLACO, we would fully fund their request. So those are the two new programs in this year's CDBG exhibit. And then finally, no, not finally, excuse me. Then we also determined for applicants that scored less than 70 that we could not fund them in this cycle. And then for applicants that scored between 70 and 75, and there were two, there were three. One of those applicants was a new applicant, and we determined that unfortunately it was a large request and we could not fund it. It was $250,000 and we could not fund it. The other two were applicants that had previously been awarded funds, and we determined that they would receive a fraction of their request, slightly below their previous year award. So that's how we awarded those funds. The other flag I'll make is that at the end of the day, we still had more money that we wanted to award in public services than we had available. And so we had to make 2 additional cuts that occurred outside of this RFP process. Because in addition to funding nonprofits, the city also funds other city departments and agencies. And 2 of those entities that we fund are Operation Brightside and SLAAA on aging. And what we did for both of them is that we funded a fraction of their award. And the rationale for that is we do not want to actually interfere with their operations. We are not intending to actually reduce the scope of services that they provide. The conclusion we reached is because there are other funds available through ARPA for neighborhood beautification and for senior services, that we could reduce their allocation by, in the case of SLAAA, I think it was about 130,000, and in the case of Operation Brightside, I think it was 185,000. But that will be sufficient for Operation Brightside specifically to continue operating at full capacity for the first 6 months of the year. And the goal is that by July 1st, we can have other funds in place to pick up where the CDBG funds have left off. So that's a general summary of the exhibit. I'm also going to just briefly here at the end provide 2 other updates regarding CDA and what we're working on. One is that we are striving to expand the home repair program because we do have that 15 million in ARPA funds awarded to us, and we are working to really scale it. And our goal is to eventually double the number of home repairs that we have. The big constraint there, and our wait list is 863 individuals, and we conduct about 200 home repairs a year. So if you think about it, that means if you join the wait list, unless you have an urgent priority repair that we can move up the wait list, it's going to take us 4 years to get to you. And that's obviously not acceptable. The program's been a victim of its own success because there's not many other places that a homeowner can get $20,000 cash to improve their home. Essentially, the big constraint that we face as we try and scale it is contractors. So just want this committee to know that as we move forward, welcome any contractors that you can send our way. Alderwoman Davis generously connected me with the AABCA, Black Contractors Association, and we had a great conversation recently, hopeful that some of those contractors can come on board, and welcome any other committee member to do the same, because we really need, and any member of the public listening as well, we really need as many contractors as possible to join this project, especially as we see so much construction throughout the city, and we see labor rates and rising and supply chain shortages. Some of these smaller projects really slip through the cracks. And so we need as many contractors as possible. The other thing I'll mention is that CDA is also hiring. So if y'all know anyone, please connect them to me. Again, that goes for members of the public as well as members of this committee. We currently have 28 people on our payroll, but a approved budget of 44. And we need to build that capacity in order to effectively deploy both the CDBG and home funds, as well as the ARPA funds that we've been tasked with administering. So with that, happy to answer any questions the committee may have. We can't hear you, Alderwoman Davis, you're mute.
Mr. Pfeffer, I think you had an amendment. Did you want to do that now?
That's exactly right. We do have one amendment, and that is to amend Exhibit A of Board Bill number 101 to essentially add to 4 lines where it currently says St. Louis Development Corporation. We want to say the Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority and the St. Louis Development Corporation, or the Land Reutilization Authority and the St. Louis Development Corporation. And the rationale for that is historically the board bill has said SLDC, even though CDA works with the public boards. But we want to really clarify as our administration, frankly, is understanding SLDC's unique role better. And as the city councilor's office is assessing it, we've come to understand that SLDC really is a 501c4 private entity, whereas which contracts with all of these public boards, right? And the boards are fully public entities established under state statute. And so because we award these funds, not through the competitive funding process for nonprofits, but the essentially public entity funding process, we concluded that to protect both the city and SLDC and to just clean this up, it makes sense to add this language.
Vice Chair Kotar.
You want me to adopt the amendment? I move to adopt Amendment 1 to Board Bill, what's the number?
101.
101.
Second.
Previous roll.
I think we had somebody come on late, didn't we? Alderwoman, let me see, did she come on yet? No, she didn't. We can go with that. So we can accept previous roll. Madam Clerk,
Yes, ma'am, I have it. Previous roll of 4.
okay, thank you very much. I'd also like to have Vice Chair Kotor, I'd like to have you, because I'd like to interact with this board bill along with Mr. Pfeffer. So could you work with the committee to have any questions answered?
Certainly, I'm happy to. Full disclosure, I'm on speakerphone. I'm heading to a hearing in rural Missouri. So would it be possible maybe for Alderman Narayan or Alderman Cohen to chair?
Absolutely, Alderman Cohen.
Morning, Madam Chair. My apologies. I'm trying to pull up the agenda on my computer here,
Okay,
so I can be both on my phone and my computer at the same time.
sure. And the exhibit is primarily what we'll be looking at. We didn't ask the question, but no one else suggested, but everyone has that available to them to review as we move forward.
Yep, I see the exhibit in the shared drive here.
Okay,
Okay, so taking questions on Board Bill 101 as amended.
yes, please.
Alderman or Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Narayan.
No questions, but thank you, Noel, for the presentation. It was very informative.
Thanks, Alderman. Alderwoman Evans. I am looking through the list here. There's some non-committee members that are on the call. Alderwoman Keys or Alderwoman Ingracia, do either of you have questions?
I don't have questions. Thanks for checking, Alderman.
Thank you, Alderman. No, I do not have any questions.
Okay. Thank you both for your attendance today. Noel, I was just kind of curious with the social services category, specifically, I think maybe it was the Ryan White. No, it's not the Ryan White grant. There's social services for AIDS housing, AIDS HIV housing.
Yes, that's the HOPWA funds.
Thank you. Ryan White goes through the health department. So is there, is that an application process for those funds? Or are we just doing that through kind of allocation here? Or how does that work specifically?
So the HOPWA funds are also administered by the health department, not CDA. The HOPWA funds, however, are HUD funds. And so what we do is we wrap all these HUD funds together into our annual action plan, which CDA handles the monitoring and reporting for HUD. So that's why I'm presenting on it here today. The Department of Health does contribute to that action plan as well as to further reporting as they administer it, and they do allocate those funds through competitive processes. Historically, however, they've done these competitive processes and have worked with Doorways and Peter and Paul Community Services, and I believe they would have to confirm this. Please allow them to confirm this, but I believe that they amend those contracts with occasional new competitive cycles.
Is this just for housing, or does it include other services as well? I'm thinking of organizations like Food Outreach that, provide regular nutrition supplement and whatnot for patients with HIV, AIDS, and cancer, and similar organizations that do kind of more the wraparound services for those patients.
It's very much focused on housing, tenant-based rental assistance, mortgage and utility assistance, permanent housing placement services, housing information services, facility-based housing. There is a category for supportive services by which they largely mean case management, not the kind of specific food pieces. And there's also a cap on the supportive services. So you can't spend more than X% of it on.
Yep. Yeah, those caps.
They are frustrating. The mayor, I'll flag, along with dozens of other mayors, sent a letter to HUD January of this year requesting that they lift or waive the public service cap. But unfortunately, it does appear to have origins in statute passed by Congress, and thus it's a challenge.
Yeah, they go back decades at this point, but I am curious, though. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation around the community outreach component. This is one of those, components. This meeting today, which obviously we have, 14 participants on. I can't see how many folks that are in the full attendees. I think there's one other person on this call, so that's not a huge amount of public participation in a city of 300,000, roughly. The meetings that you had prior this year, I think you mentioned you had some engagement meetings in July. Can you just explain a little bit more, what community engagement processes have, taken place, and how many people approximately have been involved in that process?
Yeah, I'll say, first of all, that I wasn't here for those, so I was not present at those hearings, but I understand that they had very low attendance, to your point. Something that I think we have to do here at CDA is go back to our roots as the community development administration and connect with community. That's one item that we added to the budget this year, actually before I knew I would be over here, is a public information officer to conduct more of that outreach, to show up in neighborhood associations, which I myself will also be showing up to. And also critically, I think making this process more accessible and just demystifying it a little bit. And even it's basic, but graphic design for our RFPs, right? How are they designed such that people can easily digest what the process is and how it works? Frankly, I think the MFH's, Missouri Foundation for Health, their RFPs are really a great model in terms of more accessible, well-designed language and being intentional about that, because that's a key part of equity as well. So I think you're exactly right, Alderman Cohen, that historically the community engagement that we've done has been underwhelming, and we often check that box because we have to hold the hearing and we check that box. But moving forward, would certainly like to be more intentional about it, have this PIO joining that will hopefully lend some capacity to these efforts, and would love to partner with all of you as aldermen in connecting to your communities. If there's events that you think I should be at, or CDA representative should be at. I'd be happy to be there. We will be at, along with many other city departments, our pop-up city hall and cleanup build-up in Hyde Park on the 15th this weekend. So looking forward to connecting with some folks in that setting, but welcome any and all ideas in terms of how we can do better and reach more people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've not been on HUDs very frequently throughout my tenure down here at the Board of Aldermen, but I do try to pay attention to what's going on in this committee because it is very important and touches many aspects of our city, particularly, excuse me, and neighborhoods like mine. And so, I've always been a little bit frustrated by the lack of community outreach and engagement from CDA. I've remembered at times where we've been very proud of having 400 community members that that have participated in these plans. And while that's a lot of people, it's not a lot of people when it's reflective of the communities that we represent. And certainly I think we can do a much better job of engaging our neighbors where they are, instead of expecting them to come to some, forum downtown to talk about things that are very high level or, kind of archaic for them, and making it more relatable to them, to your point, I think is really important. So I'm glad to hear that those are things that you're working on. I don't really have any other questions. I think this is the first committee hearing I've been at where you've given a presentation, and just want to, congratulate you on your new role, welcome you to CDA officially, publicly. I know we've had that conversation already privately, but, excited for you and your new opportunity here.
Thanks so much, Alderman. I really appreciate it.
I'm going to see if there's any other folks that have their hand raised or have questions. I am not seeing any. Madam Chair, do you have any last questions or remarks that you would like to make on Board Bill 101 as amended?
Oh, I wanted to share as well. The presentation was done very, first of all, with some recognition for time, but most especially, it was thorough. The amendment with the exhibit attached really made it simple for us to follow. I also had looked at the report that was given, I believe was given by the St. Louis Development Corporation about community meetings on the ARPA funds. And a lot of the information that came from those public meetings really touched on many of the things that are in this proposal. So we have heard from the public, and I think we can feel a little bit comfortable about that. Also, I just wanted to ask about one organization, because you were talking about home repairs, and Harambe that does the tuck pointing. Did they not apply?
Yeah, that's a great point. And we were surprised by that as well. They did not apply this cycle. However, we do want to keep working with them, and we are exploring other funding sources that may be a good fit, but they did not apply this year.
I appreciate that, because 75% of the people need tuck pointing.
Oh, absolutely. And we have had a great experience working with them and hope to do so in the future. If I make two more points on the public engagement, community engagement. One is that we also did conduct an ARPA needs survey that received over 5,000 responses. And that has also informed both this and upcoming ARPA appropriations as well. The other thing I want to emphasize is that it's really important, certainly, to get community engagement on the front end to help inform the allocations, but it can't stop there. It has to be a dialogue, and to get engagement as you start to implement as well is critical. And to have that iterative loop and cycle where as we're implementing, we're learning, and then that informs future appropriations as well.
I totally agree. In the past, early on with CDA, we had semi-annual meetings with all of the neighborhood associations, and they were very good in getting people out. So hopefully we can look at something like that as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to exploring that. And one of my big priorities for the remainder of the year is planning to meet with every sub-recipient, everyone who we currently award funds to, and B, hope to start meeting. I'm not going to say meet with every neighborhood association. That's probably impossible in this short time span, but start that process of going out to these meetings.
Okay. Well, for me, that's the only questions that I had or concerns. And what I'd like to do is to bring this process to asking for favorable consideration from the committee in adopting Board Bill 101 as amended.
I make a motion that we adopt Board Bill 101 as amended.
Second.
Previous roll.
Okay. Alderman Cone?
There was a request for previous roll.
Okay, I didn't hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, it came from Alderman Coder, but it was very faint.
Okay.
So Alderman Coder, you might want to speak up a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk, did you get that?
Yes, ma'am, I do have it. Previous roll, Alderman Kotar. Previous roll is 4.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Cone, I thank you very much for handling that for me. As and Director Stafford, I thank you very much for your presentation today. And I know that we will be working more in the near future. So that concludes the Board Bill 101 as amended. And on our agenda, we don't have any other items for consideration today. We have 2 alderpersons that need to be excused. Madam Clerk, do you have those names?
Yes, that would be Alderwoman Boyd and Alderwoman Evans.
Okay, thank you. And I'd just like to give a reminder, we have a HUD's committee meeting scheduled for every Thursday that we are doing business through the end of the year. And it's very important that anyone who's interested in getting a board bill on this agenda, that they work with the clerk's office, follow their instructions. And those of us who are alder people, we know we have to send a note to the clerk to have our bills put on the agenda. Other than that, I don't have anything. Is there anything from any of the committee members that need to be discussed? Hearing none, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
They sound just the same.
Okay, thank you. So you all have a safe day. As you have seen on social media, be careful everywhere you go. Be blessed. Thank you.